Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Today's classic Creepfest, the River Country film. It had been 3 years since my family had last gone on vacation to Florida, something we had done annually before the recession hit. Since we now again had enough money, my parents decided, under popular demand from my sister and I, that we go to Walt Disney World. We were both teenagers, and our parents apparently kind of saw this as a bit juvenile, but decided that it would be fun anyway. I couldn't wait to finally go back, and neither could Sis. Being avid theme park goers as well, even my parents were especially attracted to the creativity and, well, the magic, as they would say, about the rides there. They never got old, and their share of nostalgia had its own excitement. However, there was one other reason that I wanted to go. You normally associate Disney World with words such as fun, excitement, and happiness. But with these characterizations come counterbalances. After scrolling through OMG Facts one night, I came across a rather interesting fact. It was about an abandoned water park in WDW, apparently named River Country. I was absolutely appalled by this, since I'd previously thought of Disney in a more idealistic and, I guess, perfect way. The water park was directly on the shores of Bay Lake. That was the huge stagnant body of water directly adjacent to the Magic Kingdom. River Country was, and still is, on the same side of the park as the lake just mentioned, but right next to a resort called Walt Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort. Surrounding the water park on the resort side is a large green wall with signs dotting it. This place opened in 1976, and it used water from Bay Lake in most of the park's attractions. It was very rustic and wilderness-based in design, and contained artificial rocks that resembled those used on another attraction, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. There was a dam present to keep chunks of dirt and mud from getting into the water too, so guests didn't have to worry about swimming in an artificial bog created by water from the lake. It was open for almost 25 years, closing its doors in 2001, and in 2005 a statement was released by Disney that said that the park would be closed for good. So for about 11 years, River Country has been sitting abandoned. Nature is in its advanced stages of reclaiming the area, but the slides still remain, and so do the artificial rocks and the small pond. Now it's a swamp, though. That was used for swimming. Many urban explorers have infiltrated the area, jumping over the walls to get footage of the abandoned water park. And one of the most controversial things about the park nowadays is the reason why it closed, which is what I was, destined to find out. I wanted to see some real footage of the area before it closed as well, since from what I heard it was joyous, bustling with tourists compared to its ghost town status today. I was without internet at the time, so about 2 days before we were planning to leave, I went down to the local library, which archived many old videos that people in my community had dug up in their attics and donated to the library to be part of a small local historical society. I was hoping that I might find some good footage, and I asked the librarian if they happened to carry any videos that had anything to do with family vacations. She nodded and brought me to a small section containing many old VCR cassettes and a few DVDs here and there. It took me about half an hour of searching before I finally came across a cassette with the words "The Old-Fashioned Swimming Hole" inscribed on top of it. This was a term that they'd used to describe River Country during its glory days, so I took it almost certain that it was just the footage that I was looking for. I asked the librarian if I could sign it out, but she told me that historical videos needed to stay inside the library. I could, however, watch the video in a small conference room behind the front desk. The librarian led me into the windowless room, and I took a seat in front of the television. She left the room and closed the door so that the audio wouldn't disturb any of the other library patrons. I popped the cassette into the VCR and turned the lights off so I could see the video better. I was expecting the quality to be kinda low anyway, given the age of the tape. For about a half minute or so, the screen was gray and it was accompanied with a loud beeping noise. This was typical for old VCR cassettes. The gray soon disappeared, showing footage of two individuals in front of the entrance to River County. Both of them were men, and it was either very late at night or very early in the morning, as nobody else was in the park. Very few of the water park's lights were on either. On the bottom left corner of the screen, the date November 1st, 2001 was displayed. This was significant because the water park closed for good the very next day, on November 2nd. The two men were talking about how they'd been denied entrance to the park in the morning since it had reached its safe capacity limit. They also stated that only at these hours of the night could they get past the park security. The two walked up to the bigger water slides in the park, which led directly into the pond supplied by the green water of Bay Lake. Once they got to the top of the slide, which was encircled by artificial orange rocks, one man prepared to slide down. The two laughed over what was apparently an inside joke, and finally the cameraman ended up pushing his friend down. I heard him scream in delight as he descended into the pond, and then the cameraman proceeded back the way they'd come to get to the slides and across a bridge that traversed the small lagoon. He ended up back at the pond's shore where the sound of a splash was heard. This is when the video started to unsettle me a little. After waiting at the shore of the pond for about 3 minutes, no one had surfaced. The cameraman began to cry out his friend's name, kind of frantically, and started to run back to get help at Fort Wilderness Resort. He stopped abruptly, though, at what seemed to be a kiddie area, a small, more shallow pond, on hearing a faint cough. He instantly turned around and saw a barely visible shadow about 10 or so feet behind him. Relieved, the cameraman started to approach his friend, glad that he was okay, but then again, he abruptly halted. His friend's head was hanging down, and slowly it inched back up. The cameraman started to hyperventilate as the features of the other man's face began to show. Crimson, dry blood was caked around his mouth, and some of it was even dripping off his chin. He was missing all of the hair on his head as well, but one of the most disturbing parts of this image was that there were patches of skin missing that revealed parts of the man's skull and jawbone, and he was even missing his right eye, leaving an empty socket. I became severely nauseous at the sight of this, to the point where I was swallowing my own vomit. My heart also began to race as fear started to settle into my body. As the last minutes of the film approached, the horrendous figure muttered something that sounded like, "There is no hope," under the water, and with that, the cameraman ran for his life, wheezing and panicking throughout his ordeal. I wanted to turn the television off and run myself, so I bolted to the door leading out of the room. Then I paused before reaching for the doorknob. The television was giving off the sound of an old furnace found in the basement of a home, just in a softer tone. That tone, for some unknown reason, kept me from moving anywhere. I just stared blankly at the television. The cameraman was still running away, but didn't seem to be making any progress. He'd ended up back at the large pond where the slide had dumped his friend. You could hear him sobbing softly, fearing for his life. Then the tape began to gradually slow down as the man frantically looked from side to side. The audio volume, along with the furnace sound, began to get louder as the video lagged. Haltingly, the cameraman turned all the way around and shrieked at the sight of his friend. The video paused on this frame, exposing the caked blood all over the other man's face. The top of his skull bone was now completely exposed, the right eye still missing. His mouth was wide open, and coming from it was what looked like a combination of the water from Bay Lake and bile. This stayed on the screen for about 10 seconds, and then switched to a black screen displaying one single message. The epidemic begins today. Instantly, the power went out, and I was left alone in the darkness of the conference room. I'd become so terrified as I couldn't see a thing, and I didn't see the door either. I began to shake in absolute fear. This was why River Country had closed. It was obvious. Walt Disney World had been keeping a disgusting secret. I rushed to the other side of the room, disoriented. But I had no idea how bad it actually was. I heard a hiss, but all I felt was the warm breath seeping down my neck, and the smell of bile. They were doing so well right up to the ending. Just couldn't stick the landing. But you stay scary, wildlings. Make the most of your nights.